They framed me, called me unstable. Even my own family believed it. And while they were gaslighting me into silence, they were hiding millions through accounts they thought no one would trace. But my revenge wasn't emotional. It was legal. And it started the moment federal investigators opened the case. 6:42 a.m. was the time everything collapsed. Doors forced open, records seized, names exposed, and by the end of it, the man who tried to erase me was the one facing prison. And if you're wondering how I turned it around, stay with me, because I'm not who they said I was. And tonight, as Daniel Hayes walks you through it, you'll see exactly how revenge is done when you refuse to break. Chapter 1. I didn't realize my life was about to split in half until the room went quiet. It wasn't the normal kind of silence. It was the kind that feels deliberate, like people are waiting for something to break. I was standing at the head of the conference table, halfway through my presentation, when I noticed no one was looking at the screen anymore. Not even the clients, not even the interns. They were all looking at him, Daniel. He hadn't said a word yet. He was just sitting there, leaning back in his chair like he already knew how this was going to end. I remember thinking maybe I'd missed something. Maybe a slide didn't load. Maybe I said something wrong. Then he smiled. It wasn't a big smile, just enough to tell me he wasn't surprised. "Olivia," he said, calm and clear, "before you continue, I think we need to address something first." My hand tightened slightly around the remote. "What is it?" He didn't answer me right away. Instead, he reached into the folder in front of him and slid a document across the table, not to me, to the clients. "I believe this will be more relevant to the discussion." I felt it before I understood it, that shift in the room, the subtle leaning forward, the quiet exchange of looks. Something was wrong. One of the clients picked up the document. His expression changed almost instantly. Not confusion, concern. Then he looked at me. "Did you authorize this?" I didn't even know what he was talking about. Authorize what? Daniel finally leaned forward, folding his hands together like this was just another meeting. "A transfer request, $8.6 million, approved under your credentials." For a second, I actually thought he was joking. It didn't make sense. Not the number, not the accusation, not the way everyone suddenly seemed to accept it as possible. "That's not—" I shook my head. "That's not real." He didn't argue. He just nodded slightly, like he expected that reaction. "That's what we're trying to determine." The client turned the page, scanning quickly. I could see the exact moment he found the signature. My name, my authorization code. Everything looked right. Too right. "I didn't sign that," I said more firmly this time. "I've never even seen that document before." No one spoke. Not to defend me, not to question him. Just silence. And then someone near the end of the table cleared their throat. "Olivia, this is a serious matter. Maybe it's best if we pause the presentation." Pause. That word hit harder than it should have, because it didn't feel like a pause. It felt like a decision. I glanced around the room, hoping, just once, someone would meet my eyes and see what I was seeing. But they didn't. They were already pulling away. The same people who trusted me with multi-million-dollar accounts now couldn't even look at me directly. "I didn't do this," I said again, quieter now, but more controlled. Daniel watched me for a moment, then gave a small, almost sympathetic nod. "I hope that's true. For your sake." For your sake. That was the moment I understood this wasn't confusion. This was positioning. Someone had already decided what I was. I set the remote down slowly, aware that every movement was being watched now. Then, letting a gentle but determined edge creep into my voice, "Then let's verify it," I said. "Audit the logs, check the system access. You'll see I wasn't—" "We will," Daniel interrupted gently. "Of course we will." The way he said it, though, it didn't sound like he was looking for the truth. It sounded like he was buying time. 2 people from compliance were already standing near the door. I hadn't even noticed when they came in. "Olivia," one of them said, "we're going to need you to step out for a moment." Step out. Another soft phrase that didn't feel soft at all. I nodded, because arguing in that moment would have only made things worse. As I walked towards the door, I could feel it, that shift happening behind me. Conversations starting in low voices, papers being moved, decisions being made without me, and just before I stepped out, I heard Daniel again. "Let's make sure we handle this carefully. We don't want unnecessary exposure." Exposure? Like I was the risk. The hallway felt colder than I expected. For a few seconds, I just stood there, trying to piece together what had just happened. $8.6 million, a document I'd never seen, a signature that looked exactly like mine. It wasn't a mistake. It was constructed, deliberate. Whoever did this knew the system, knew my access, knew exactly how to make it believable, and more importantly, they knew how to time it. Right before a major client presentation, right when the stakes were highest. I exhaled slowly, forcing my thoughts to settle. Panic wouldn't help. Not here. Not now. That's when I noticed Mason. He was standing at the far end of the hallway, leaning against the wall like he'd been there for a while. Quiet, as always. Mason was the kind of person people overlooked, not because he wasn't capable, but because he never needed attention. He just observed. "You saw that?" I asked. He nodded once. Something felt off before it even started. People were acting prepared. Prepared, the word stayed with me. "You think this was planned?" Mason didn't answer immediately. He glanced toward the conference room, then back at me. "I think," he said slowly, "that someone wanted this to happen exactly the way this just did. Not messy, not chaotic, clean, convincing, public." I looked back at the closed door. Inside that room, they were already building a version of the story without me. And if I didn't take control of what came next, that version would be the only one that mattered. "I didn't do it," I said again, more to myself this time. "I know," Mason replied. Simple, certain, no hesitation. And for the first time since this started, I felt something shift. Not relief, something sharper. Whoever set this up didn't just want to remove me. They wanted it to look effortless, like I'd destroyed myself. I straightened slightly, my mind already starting to move past the shock, past the confusion, because if this was planned, then it wasn't perfect. Nothing ever is. And somewhere inside all of this, inside the timing, the access, the confidence, there would be a mistake. I just had to find it. And when I did, I wouldn't be standing outside that room anymore. I'd be the one deciding what happened next. Chapter 2. The email hit my inbox at 11:42 a.m. No call, no warning, just a clean subject line and language so neutral it felt almost insulting. Administrative leave pending investigation. Access revoked immediately. I read it twice, then once more, like the wording might shift if I stared long enough. It didn't. By noon, my badge stopped working. I stood there for a second outside the glass doors, waiting for the light to turn green like it always did. It didn't. Someone inside glanced up, saw me, then quickly looked back down at their screen. That was new. Julia from Risk walked past me a minute later. She slowed just enough to say, "This'll get sorted out." But her voice was tight, like she didn't want to be caught saying even that much. I nodded. "Sure." Outside, my phone buzzed before I even reached my car. Unknown number. I almost ignored it, then picked up. "This is Naomi Price," the voice said, smooth, controlled. "I handle crisis communications. I believe your situation just became public." I leaned against the car. "How bad is it?" A short pause. "Bad enough that silence will work against you," she said. "There's already an anonymous post circulating. It references an analyst tied to a loss just under $9 million. No name, but it doesn't need one." I closed my eyes briefly. "People are reading it," she added, "sharing it." Of course they were. "I didn't do this," I said. "I know," Naomi replied, calm and certain. But right now, that doesn't matter as much as you think it does. I let that sit for a second. What happens if I do nothing? Then this becomes your story, she said, and not the version you would choose. I looked out at the street. Cars passing like nothing had changed. And your help? I said. It's not inexpensive, she answered, not apologizing. Of course it wasn't. I need time, I said. Time is the one thing you're already losing, Naomi said. Then the line went dead. I stayed there for a moment, then got into the car and drove home. Ryan was already at the kitchen table when I walked in. Papers spread out, laptop open, that same stiff posture like he had been waiting for me to arrive. You got the email? He said. I dropped my bag by the counter. Yeah. He slid a document toward me. I've been looking at options, he said, just in case this turns into something bigger. I didn't sit. What kind of options? Asset protection, he said. If there's a liability here, we need to think ahead. It might be smart to sell the house now before anything escalates. I stared at him. You're already doing this? It's not finalized, Ryan said quickly. I just started the paperwork. Without telling me? He hesitated. I didn't think there was time. I let out a quiet breath. There was time. You just decided I didn't get a say. My mother leaned against the doorway, arms folded. Ryan is being practical, she said. You should listen to him. I looked at her, then back at Ryan. You think I did this? Neither of them answered. That was enough. I picked up the paper, folded it once, then set it back down. We're not selling the house, I said, not based on a story someone else wrote. Ryan rubbed his face. You're not being realistic. No, I said. You are. I went upstairs before either of them could say anything else. My phone buzzed again. This time, I opened it. The blog. Anonymous, just like Naomi said. The headline didn't use my name, but it didn't need to. An internal analyst tied to a near $9 million discrepancy. Trusted access, sudden irregularities, quiet removal. It was written like speculation, but it read like certainty. The comments were worse. People connecting dots, guessing names. Some of them got close enough to make my stomach turn. One comment stood out. If it's who I think it is, she always seemed too perfect. I locked the phone and set it down. For a second, I just sat there, staring at nothing. Then my phone buzzed again. Mason. I answered immediately. You saw it, he said. Yeah. Don't read too much of it, he added. It's already picking up traction. I leaned back against the headboard. How bad? He exhaled softly. Bad enough that people are talking internally like it's confirmed. Of course they were. I pulled something, Mason said after a second. System logs from earlier this week. I sat up. What did you find? Your credentials were used late at night, internal access point. You weren't there. My grip tightened on the phone. You're sure? I checked twice. Something cold settled into place. Send it. Already did. The file came through a second later. I opened it, scanning fast. Timestamps, access entries, everything clean. Too clean. Someone had used my account from inside the building at a time I wasn't there. This wasn't random. It was built. Who has access to those terminals? I asked. Senior staff, IT, executives. Executives. Daniel's face came to mind. Calm, measured, always one step ahead. Be careful, Mason added. If this was planned, they're not going to leave anything obvious. They already did, I said, staring at the screen. Using my credentials when I wasn't there. That's not a mistake, Mason said quietly. That's someone who knows no one will question it. I didn't answer. Maybe he was right, or maybe confidence made people sloppy. Either way, it was something. I ended the call and opened my laptop. One name. Victor Hale. I called his office and got an appointment for the next morning. The interview rejection came an hour later. We regret to inform you, but after careful consideration, we cannot proceed due to background concerns. I stared at the screen. Final round, strong fit, then this. It wasn't just my current job, it was everything. My account pinged again. Internal review notice from the bank. Of course. I let out a slow breath, feeling the pressure start to close in from every direction. Work, reputation, money, all tightening at once. The next morning, Victor Hale didn't waste time. "If this is what you think it is," he said after reviewing the logs, "then you're dealing with a coordinated setup." I nodded. "Then proving innocence won't be enough," he added. "You'll need to show intent." I leaned forward slightly. "I'm not just trying to clear my name." He watched me, waiting. "I want to know who did this." Victor held my gaze for a moment, then gave a small, almost approving nod. "That's harder," he said. "Good," I replied, "because someone this careful isn't as untouchable as they think." And if Mason was right about one thing, it was this. People only look perfect when you're standing in the wrong place. I wasn't anymore. Chapter 3. Something about the pattern started to feel too clean, not just wrong, controlled. I stopped looking at what they wanted me to see and started looking at what didn't quite fit. Mason chose the meeting spot this time, a dim bar tucked under a parking garage, the kind of place no one noticed unless they were looking for it. He was already there when I walked in. "You're late," he said quietly. I had to make sure I wasn't followed. That wasn't entirely true, but I wanted to see how he reacted. He didn't smile. "Good," he said. "You're learning." I sat across from him, watching him a little longer than necessary. "You've been tracking this since 2020. Why now?" He leaned back slightly. "Because before, it looked like noise, small irregularities, spread out. Now it's concentrated, and it landed on you. Convenient. Too convenient." I didn't say it out loud, but the thought stayed. He slid a tablet across the table. "Look." I did. Transactions, multiple accounts, different analysts, amounts that stayed just below attention, except one. Mine. "Why me?" I asked. Mason shook his head. "I don't think you were the original target." That didn't make me feel better. Then what changed? "You did," he said. "You started asking questions." I held his gaze. "And you didn't think to warn me?" "I wasn't sure who was watching." That answer sat somewhere between reasonable and dangerous. I scrolled through the data again, slower this time. Patterns and side patterns, signatures that looked like mine, not copied once, practiced, repeated. "How do I know you didn't build this?" I said. Mason didn't react right away. "You don't," he said finally. That was the first honest answer he'd given me. I nodded slightly. "Keep talking." He exhaled. "There's something else, the logs. What about them?" "They've been adjusted. Not just yours, others too." "Adjusted how?" "Admin access. Someone going back in and smoothing things out." I felt something tighten in my chest. "Who has that level?" He hesitated. "Very few people." "Names." He looked at me carefully. "You're not going to like it. Try me." Gavin Cross. The name didn't just land, it settled. Gavin wasn't just another executive. He was the kind of person people didn't question. Calm, precise, always 3 steps ahead. If his name was anywhere near this, it meant the problem was bigger than I thought. "How certain are you?" I asked. "I've seen his access used. Not directly, but enough to connect it." I leaned back slightly, letting that sink in. Gavin Cross didn't make careless moves. If he was involved, this wasn't just fraud. It was architecture. I stood up. I need someone else to confirm this. Mason nodded. Good luck. He didn't need to say anything else. The next morning, I called Lydia Harper. She ignored the first call, then the second. On the third, she picked up. You need to stop calling me, I said. I need 10 minutes. No. 5. Silence. Then a quiet breath. Fine. Noon. Don't make me regret it. She chose the place, small coffee shop just outside downtown. She was already seated when I arrived, posture tight, eyes scanning the room. This is a mistake, she said before I even sat down. Probably, but I need answers. I placed the printed data in front of her. She didn't touch it at first. Then she did. Her expression changed almost immediately. Where did you get this? It doesn't matter. It does to me. It shouldn't, I said. Have you seen anything like this before? She hesitated, then nodded once. There were complaints back in 2021. About who? She glanced around, then lowered her voice. Darren Cole. I felt a flicker of recognition. Senior operations, trusted, visible. What kind of complaints? Approval pressure. People being pushed to sign things they didn't fully understand. And nothing, she said. They were reviewed, no action taken. You believe that? She didn't answer. That was answer enough. There's more, I said. I opened my laptop. In 2019, I filed a warning about discrepancies. She frowned. I don't remember that. You should. She shook her head slowly. It's not in the system. I stared at her. It was. It isn't now. Removed. Deliberately. Lydia pushed the papers back toward me. You need to walk away. If you're right, this is bigger than you think. How big? She stood up. Big enough that people who ask questions don't stay in the room very long. She left before I could respond. I sat there for a moment, the noise around me fading. Then my phone buzzed. Mason. You need to check your email, he said. What is it? A contract, internal, signed under your name. My stomach dropped. When? 2 months ago. I was already opening my laptop. The file loaded. Procurement agreement. High value. Authorized. My name, my signature. Perfect. Too perfect. I've never seen this, I said. I know. Everything about it looked real, filed correctly, approved cleanly, like it had always been there. This was built, I said quietly. Yeah. I zoomed in on the signature. There it was again, that slight shift. Not wrong, just off, like someone who had practiced until they got close enough. I need the original logs, I said. They're restricted. I don't care. Mason was quiet for a second. I'll try. I closed the laptop slowly. Around me, people talked, laughed, moved through their day like nothing had changed. But everything had. This wasn't just about making me look guilty. It was about creating a version of me that never existed. A version that signed things I never saw, approved decisions I never made. I opened the contract again, staring at the details. And then I saw something. A reference number. Small, easy to miss, but it tied back to something older, something buried, something that shouldn't have been connected to me at all. I felt a slow, cold clarity settle in, because that number didn't just point to a document, it pointed to a person. And for the first time, this stopped feeling like a system. It started feeling like someone I could find. Chapter 4. I got to the boardroom 10 minutes early, just to feel the room before anyone else stepped in. The place always smelled faintly of polished wood and something colder underneath, like control dressed up as professionalism. Victor was already there, standing by the window, looking down at the city like he owned every decision happening beneath it. He didn't turn when I walked in. You're sure about this? I set my folder on the table, steady, no hesitation. This time, they don't get to spin it. He nodded once, but I could see it in his shoulders. Not fear, control slipping. That's what he hated. The door opened. Darren walked in first, like always. Same confident stride, same half-smile that said he thought the outcome was already decided. Behind him came the board, then Gavin, who avoided my eyes for just a second. That was enough. The meeting started clean. Numbers, charts, projections. Darren delivered it all like a polished performance, calm and convincing. This initiative positions us for stable growth over the next 3 quarters, he said, gesturing toward the screen. The data supports a low-risk expansion. Low risk. I almost smiled. When he finished, there was a brief pause. Victor looked at me. Callista. I stood, slow on purpose. No rush anymore. I think we should take a closer look at that data. A few heads turned. Darren didn't move, but I saw his jaw tighten just enough. I connected my laptop. The same numbers appeared at first, identical to his presentation. Then I switched. The room shifted before anyone said a word. This is the raw data set, I said, pulled directly from the system before adjustments. One of the board members leaned forward. Are you suggesting the previous version was altered? I didn't answer him. I looked straight at Darren. You want to explain it? Silence stretched longer than it should have. Then Darren let out a quiet laugh. This is a misunderstanding. Raw data always needs refinement to reflect real-world conditions. Refinement, I repeated, or selective removal. I brought up the logs. Every change, time-stamped, tracked. Impossible to deny. Gavin shifted in his seat. His hand tightened against the table. These weren't random edits, I said. They followed a pattern, approved, documented, executed. Victor leaned in. Approved by who? I didn't look at him. I kept my eyes on Darren. By the person who just told this room to trust the data. Something cracked. Not loudly, not dramatically, but enough. This is a character attack, Darren snapped, his voice sharper now. You don't understand how large-scale operations work. No, I said quietly. I understand exactly how they work. I understand what it feels like to be pushed out of something you built, to be blamed for numbers you never touched. I understand why you needed to do this. A few people exchanged glances. The certainty Darren walked with was fading, piece by piece. You don't have direct proof, he said quickly. Logs can be manipulated. Right on cue, the door opened. Mason stepped in, carrying a thick file. No drama, no hesitation. He placed it on the table in front of the board. Independent audit. Third-party verification. Matches her data exactly. That was it. No coming back from that. Darren turned to Gavin. Say something. Gavin stared at the table for a second, then exhaled. The changes were requested by Darren. The room didn't explode. It didn't need to. Everything just kind of collapsed inward. Darren stood up too fast. What the hell are you doing? Saving myself, Gavin said, voice low but steady. I'm not taking the fall for this. That was the moment. Not the data, not the logs. That. The shift from control to survival. Victor looked at Darren, no expression now. Do you have anything else to add? Darren looked around the room, searching for support that wasn't there anymore. This is how things get done, he said, but even he didn't sound convinced. Everyone here knows that. Not like this, Victor replied. I watched Darren then, really watched him. The confidence was gone. What was left didn't know where to stand. I told you, I said, calm, steady, final. This time, you don't get to walk it back. He looked at me, something bitter flickering in his expression. You think this is a win? I met his eyes. No, this is correction. That landed harder than anything else I'd said. The meeting dissolved after that. No formal ending, just people standing, collecting their things, avoiding eye contact like they didn't want to be part of what just happened. Darren was last to leave. He stopped beside me for a second. "This isn't over." I didn't turn. "I know." He let out a quiet, humorless laugh, then walked out. The door closed. Silence settled in. Victor adjusted his cufflinks like nothing had happened. "You handled that well." I looked at the screen, at the same numbers that had almost buried me weeks ago. They tried to rewrite the story. I just gave it its original ending. Victor gave a small nod. "Make sure it stays that way." I didn't respond. When I stepped outside, the air felt different. Lighter, but not safe. Not yet. My phone buzzed. Naomi. "It's already moving," her message read. "Industry chatter's shifting. They're losing control of the narrative." Good, but not enough. I looked up at the skyline, watching the last light fade between the buildings. Darren wasn't the top, really. He was just the one who got caught. And now that I knew how deep this went, I wasn't interested in defending myself anymore. I was ready to start hunting.
Chapter 5. Things did not slow down after that day. They accelerated, like the system had been waiting for a reason to turn on him. By the next morning, a formal investigation was announced. Not internal, not quiet, and definitely not something anyone could spin away. Federal regulators stepped in, and suddenly every email, every transaction, every decision tied to Darren's projects was under review. His name started circulating before lunch. I watched most of it from a distance, not hiding, not avoiding it, just choosing not to stand in the middle of the noise anymore. My phone kept lighting up with updates, but I stopped reacting to each one. I already knew how this would play out. Once the truth had structure behind it, it did not need me anymore. Within days, his accounts were frozen. Personal, corporate, anything connected to the deals he had pushed through. Properties flagged, investments stalled, partnerships paused. Everything he built on manipulation started collapsing under its own weight. Gavin moved fast, faster than I expected, but not faster than he needed to. He cooperated fully, handed over documentation, gave statements that aligned with the evidence. It was not loyalty that drove him, it was survival. I did not blame him for that. Sienna tried to hold her ground at first. That did not last. Her name came up in internal messages, tied to conversations that made everything look coordinated instead of incidental. It did not take long for people to distance themselves. Boards she sat on asked her to step down. Invitations stopped coming. People who once stood next to her in public stopped returning calls in private. Reputation leaves quietly. That was something I understood better now. The company issued a statement 2 weeks later, carefully written, legally safe, but clear enough that no one could pretend nothing happened. They acknowledged misconduct, announced structural changes, and confirmed compensation. I read it once and put my phone down. An apology does not fix anything, but it shifts responsibility, and sometimes that is enough to change everything that comes after. At home, things were different. My brother had built his sense of control around documents and decisions, around the idea that if he held the right authority, nothing could touch him. When the investigation reached him, when those same documents were pulled apart and re-examined, that belief did not survive. Control moved away from him piece by piece. We sat across from each other one evening without knowing how to start. He looked tired in a way I had never seen before. I did not feel victorious, just certain. My mother took longer to face it. She had believed what was easier to believe, that things were complicated, that I was overreacting, that time would fix what it always fixes. When the story became public, when it was no longer something she could reinterpret, she stopped explaining and started listening. She asked me to come over one afternoon. We sat at the same table where she once told me to be patient, to trust that things would work themselves out. This time, she did not offer advice. She said she should have trusted me. That mattered more than anything else she could have said. The hearing was set a few weeks later. By then, the story had spread beyond anything personal.
Analysts, reporters, people with no connection to any of us were now discussing it like it had always belonged to them. I took my seat without looking around too much. Darren was already there. For a second, I almost didn't recognize him. Not physically, but in the way he carried himself. The confidence that used to define him was gone. What remained looked like someone trying to understand how everything slipped out of his control. When he looked at me, there was no anger left in it. Just something sharper, something that sounded like disbelief when he spoke. He leaned forward slightly, voice low. He said I had ruined everything. I held his gaze for a moment. Then I told him the truth. I did not ruin anything. I just stopped protecting what he thought he could hide. He sat back after that, like the weight of it had finally settled in. The hearing moved forward without surprises. No sudden twists, no dramatic confessions, just evidence, confirmation, and the steady process of making everything official. That was enough. By the end of it, there was nothing left for him to argue. Outside, the air felt different again. Not lighter, not heavier, just settled, like something had finally reached its natural end. A few weeks later, I accepted a new position. Different structure, different people, but one thing mattered more than anything else: control. Not the kind that depends on manipulation, but the kind that comes from knowing exactly what you are building and why it cannot be taken from you the same way twice. Mason stayed in touch. What he did during the investigation did not go unnoticed, and for once, recognition found him without resistance. Lydia left quietly, no announcement, no explanation, just gone. Victor reached out once, brief as always. He said what happened set a precedent, something others would have to account for moving forward. I read the message and did not respond. Some things don't need acknowledgement to stay true. One late afternoon, weeks after everything had settled, I found myself standing above the city again, looking out at the same skyline that once felt like something I had to survive. Now it felt different. Not easier, just clear. I thought about how close I came to walking away, how simple it would have been to let things stay the way they were, to accept the version of the story that had been written for me. That version of me would not have lasted, because this was never about revenge the way people like to frame it. It was about control, about patience, about staying long enough to make sure the truth didn't just surface, but stayed where everyone could see it. I did not destroy them, I just stopped letting them hide. And once that happened, everything else followed. If you were in my place, would you have walked away? Or would you have stayed long enough to make sure they could never do this to anyone again? If this story meant something to you, stay with me, share your thoughts below, and follow along for more stories that might feel a little closer to your own.